The next clip will talk about how we work together. Okay, we have a concept that's introduced in the Japanese cost management book called the operating doctrine. That is a new concept for you, and it came about as something to discuss in certain groups or people that follow certain business methods, largely because of the stuff that you see in Chapter 3. That material is so different that it implied more than just, it wasn't just a bunch of different tools. It wasn't just different stuff. It was a different way of thinking. So what happened at that point, or what happened when some people looked at it, was they realized that there was a different set of obligations that people felt about work. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're talking about the operating doctrine. Okay? And a lot of what we know, we learned from looking at the Japanese to see how they approach certain things that they do. Because they have been doing the Chapter 3 type things the longest and the deepest. They're not the only ones, and they have not innovated. They didn't create all of the things that you see in Chapter 3, but they have been the most deeply embedded in the overall endeavor. So what we observed when we looked at them is what we call the IKM model. Okay. I'll talk about this for a few minutes. It's important to keep in mind, though, this is not a technical model. This is a model, this operating doctrine idea. We're talking about the emotional and ethical sense of responsibility people have. So this is both emotional and ethical. And it's talking about people's feeling of responsibility. Okay? So why do people follow rules? To what extent do they follow rules? Do they resist following rules? And why? And our theories from the West really fail to answer anything, because one thing that's perfectly clear, you'll see this in the video, especially that TED Talk by Dan Pink. The research in psychology is completely unanimous that incentives don't work. In fact, incentives tend to make people stupider, right? Because people get overly focused. They become functionally fixated on the incentive itself rather than what they're supposed to be trying to do. So incentives are proven not to work, yet our culture still believes in them. It's part of that Anglo-Axis thing, remember? The whole idea that the king can reward, the king can punish. We believe in that sense of rewards and punishments, even though, you just go look at the psychology research. It never works, ever. Yet we still believe in it, and we still talk about it in business. And in finance, they talk about it all the time. It's a naive view of what motivates people. When you look at why people do things, mostly it's because they have a feeling of responsibility. That's why you come to school on time. And here's an example. If we were in face-to-face classes, and our class started at 9 o'clock in the morning, what would happen if you're 10 minutes late? You come to the door. It's now 10 minutes after 9. I'm talking. Students are answering. We're writing on the board. Most people will hesitate before they come in, and they'll come in sheepishly. They'll be a little uncomfortable with the fact that they're late. They'll physically uncomfortable. In fact, they often will sort of hunch over, symbolically telling everyone, I know I'm late. Okay, this posture? That's what you're doing, is you're communicating to everybody that you're a little bit ashamed and you're accepting responsibility, and then you skulk over to your seat. Now, why'd you do that? Do you think you're going to get punished? I mean, some professors yell at you, but why do you feel bad though? That's the thing. It's not fear of punishment. Well, guess what? You have actually developed in your notice I did this good, in your heart? No, it's in your brain, of course, but we always think it's in our hearts because sometimes our hearts beat just fast. But you have developed a feeling of ethical responsibility where you believe that you have failed at something if you're late to that meeting. Notice that's pretty abstract, right? Historically, like how many people ever born on the planet Earth have ever or would ever feel a sense of responsibility to be anywhere at a certain specific time? Almost nobody. This is part of the Industrial Revolution. It's part of what enables us to function in this society. Is if you don't have that ethical responsibility, you're probably not going to do it because, incentives really are not going to work. You'll see that in the Dan Pink video. You don't believe me? You look up the research. Incentives don't work. Guess what? Punishments don't work, right? All you have to do is look at the history of humans and see, did punishments ever really stop anyone from doing anything? Did punishments stop people from taking drugs? No. Do they stop people from committing crimes? No. They stop some people, but what they're doing is they're stopping the people that feel a sense of responsibility. If you're really a criminal, punishment's not going to deter you, right? If you really want drugs, punishment's not going to deter you. So that's what we're starting to come to grips with when we talk about operating doctrine, is we want to know why people do things, what motivates them. And the model we're going to use in this class is the IKM model. We're going to say that roughly there are three levels, although when we wrote that book we made a mistake. There's really, sort of a level below that. I'm going to put it in squiggly lines here to show that it's not in the book, but it's there, which is lower than M. And these words, M means, I'm not going to write out everything because it's in the book, you have to read that. Maintenance level, meaning you have an ethical or moral responsibility to maintain the rules of the organization that you're in. K is Kaizen, meaning it's the Japanese version of continuous improvement. We don't call it continuous improvement because in English and in US and Canada and England, that phrase continuous improvement doesn't really mean the right thing. Kaizen is a deeper kind of obligation. I is innovation, meaning, so Kaizen would be you have an ethical responsibility to change your organization for the better. Okay? I means you have an ethical responsibility to change your organization in dramatic ways. So this sort of happened, it started becoming solidified in Japan for historically important reasons. Japan is poor. You have a different view of them than I did. Every generation changes. You just think of them as making some cool stuff, but some of their stuff is sort of boring and old-fashioned. They do make, certain cool things. In the 80s and 90s, they were making the coolest stuff on the planet, but other designers and other things, eclipsed them a bit. They haven't been eclipsed in terms of quality. They're still known, for the most part, to make the highest quality things. So if you can afford whatever product you're making, buy it. The Japanese one's going to be the more durable, higher quality one. You want to draw, 4-cylinder engines, like for a gas mower or something like that, it's Honda. And just go look. Try and buy a log splitter or whatever you're going to buy from, and the log splitter will be made in Canada, and they'll have different engines. You want the good engine, it's going to be the Honda, you're going to pay extra money for it. So this is a problem. Or not a problem. But the Japanese are known for quality, and partly it's this M is they developed that very, very strongly. Why? Well, they're poor. That's what it comes down to. The Japanese people Japan can't feed the Japanese people. There's not enough arable land, arable meaning farmable land. There's not enough farmable land in Japan to feed the Japanese people. And it's been that way for a long, long time. So they are always in a feeling of tension and fear. They don't always know why. When you talk to them, they don't say, "Oh, we can't feed ourselves," but that lack of natural resources is pervasive, and it creates a tension in there where they feel committed to doing better. Also, the government supports are much weaker than Canada. They don't have national health care. There are a lot of government supports that we have that they don't experience. So, their only way to really feed themselves and their family is they got to work. They have to make money. And Japan is like that too. Japan doesn't have minerals, doesn't have food, doesn't have petroleum, doesn't have enough hydroelectric power. Almost everything that we consider a part of our life, Japan has to import. And then they have to pay for it, of course. So they have to import everything. I mean, every piece of raw material that goes into every product in Japan is imported. Then they have to work on it. Then they have to sell it to us for more than it cost them to ship it into Japan and work on it. So the whole Japanese nation feels a sense of tension that's higher than we would ever know here in Canada. So in the early days or whatever, they developed this very strongly, this sense that, boy, I really need to work because if my company fails, I could starve. So I need to focus my effort on my community, my village, my town, because everything I deal with, I need to help them survive, to make them effective, because my life really depends on it. So that's probably the historical reason. That's a bit of speculation, of course, but they have this extremely strongly, okay? Because they have to follow the rules. Some places don't have this at all. Some places we would say pre-M, where people don't do this. I also talk about the 3 M's. A way to think about maintenance level is most of the people have to follow most of the rules most of the time. If that doesn't work, our society falls apart. Everything depends on this. Okay? We're not going to have roads. We're not going to have cloth. Just look at a piece of cloth you have. Every piece of cloth you have is a flippin' miracle. Like, could you even figure out how to make cloth? I mean, this is 1,000 years of human creativity to make the shirt that you're wearing, the jacket, to make glasses. Everything we have depends on people doing the right thing at the right time, meaning our whole life depends on most of the people following most of the rules most of the time. Not all, but most. So this then is how we get to M. And we know that you cannot punish people into following rules and you can't reward them. It has to be here. So M means an ethical, a company and a nation and an organization works to develop within itself and within the colleagues that work there this sense of moral responsibility. We have it in Canada, not as strong as the Japanese typically have it. We have a fairly good sense of this. Most people, when they go to work, try and do a good job for their colleagues, and you have felt that. If you did a bad job at your work term placement, you just didn't shrug and say, "Oh, they caught me." You actually felt, "Oh man, I let them down." That's the feeling. That feeling of, "Oh, I let somebody down." That's what M is. You let people down if you don't do your job. What's this? This is, if you live in Canada where I live, this is what farmers in Canada are like. If you tell a farmer, you got to meet, it's important that you're here for this meeting at 8 o'clock. Yeah, good luck with that. Farmers have important stuff to do, but most of their life is run based on, is the sun shining? Is it raining? Is the wind there? Is there a storm? Are there animals in my field? Are there insects? I mean, their lives are tough, but they're not clock driven. On the other hand, some of you guys are in accounting because you really want to be, in investment banking and you want to work in downtown Toronto. I'll tell you what, you are going to have to be the king of M. You're not going to be able to work in downtown Toronto unless you follow every rule possible and you look for more rules to follow because you have to totally fit in to get up into that space. Who else doesn't follow rules? Just look at Africa, look at South America, look at Asia. In tribal cultures, they don't follow rules. That's one reason that they can't make anything, right? Well, excuse me, that's totally stupid to say. That's one reason they can't fully participate in our industrial economy. Because if you want to participate in our industrial economy, right, where you have cloth like this, you have to be able to make something that is equivalent to this. You have to make a piece of equipment that can be sold to 10 million people. Okay? You can't just be on the fringes. You have to be in the core. If you're in the fringes, you're always like a little bit, you can get knocked off pretty easily. If you want to be in the core, and have the kind of stuff we think is cool, you have to do it our way because there's no other way. There's no other way to compete in an industrialized society except by being part of an industrialized society. So that's why, a lot of countries and a lot of especially tribal cultures everywhere, they're on the fringe because they can't do this. And they also can't be M, right? Because they don't follow rules. You want to start a factory and my whole career has been on the sort of social justice kind of consulting. And we always have people say, "Oh, I want to help people here, and I want to help people in Nicaragua or wherever, Caribbean islands, and we'll start a factory there." And I always go, "Wait a minute, if you have a factory, people have to come to work. I mean, most of the people have to come to work at 8 a.m. every single day. And it doesn't matter, you can't pay them enough to do this. It has to be their own feeling, and it's not going to happen. Tribal cultures are pre-in. So most of Africa is going to have difficulty fitting into our model of this industrialized culture until they give up that. Now, what are they giving up? What's the difference between here? What are we? We're sheep. This is another, you can talk about this in good and bad from both directions. You can say, okay, we're more industrially advanced, so we have cool stuff. Like everyone gets to wear a jacket. We have little cool dry erase pens. We have iPhones, We have medical care with X-ray machines and CAT scanners. And we have that only because we're here, and so we're cooler. But what do we give up? We gave up a lot of human authenticity. Because if you look at these guys and you talk to them and sort of get into their head, they look at us and they go, "Boy, you guys are a bunch of rule-following sheep. Man, you gave up your life. You gave up your independence and your autonomy for a bunch of stuff. I'm not doing that. My life and being free and loving my kids and being out in nature, that's more important than this bunch of stupid stuff." Okay? So, when you talk about this, it's not clear that there's a good or bad here. If you want to live a life, let's pull this out. If you decide life of having cell phones like iPhones is important, then this is good, and above is good. But if having stuff like this is not important, then this is not good, because you and I sacrificed a huge amount of personal autonomy in this feeling. Because every time your ethical responsibility goes like that, you sacrifice your ability to make your other choices, because you said, "I'm not going to make that choice. I'm going to constrain my choices to be something that helps or that does something for somebody else." And down here, they do that, but on a smaller scale. Their ethical responsibility is to a much smaller group of people, and it's not to a clock. Okay? So this was giant. If this doesn't happen, there's no industrial revolution. You can look at the history of the industrial revolution. People don't talk about this that much. They don't talk about this aspect. They just talk about the technical aspect. The part they always forget is, if you don't have people give up personal autonomy and become rule-following sheep like you and I, this is not going to happen. So you want to have dry erase markers? You want to have the internet? This is the minimum requirement for the internet to exist. Is most of us have to follow most of the rules most of the time. Now, so the Japanese are stronger at that than we are. They are more attuned to following rules than we are. So our society is a little bit sloppier and not as effective in that way of making things work correctly. Our trains don't, you go to Japan, go into the subway system or the train system. If the schedule says that train's leaving at 9:17, you better be there at 9:17, because that train's going to leave at 9:17. And when you look at the schedule and there are 300 trains and each one look at the time, you had better be there at that minute, because that train, every 100 trains in a row is going to leave bang at that time. And this goes throughout their whole culture. Right? They're definitely better rule followers than we are. They get more benefits, but also our bias and prejudice is sometimes us guys, whoever you are, you go and visit them, you sort of think, "Oh, that's a little bit creepy that they're so, they follow so many rules." Well, you know what? They like it, and it might be creepy for us, not creepy for them. They like it and they get something from it. One, the trains always work, and that's not just trains, it's every part of their society works that little bit better than ours does. So they're at this stage here, they're better, better than us, they're working on stuff, but Also, things get tough in Japan, and they realize, man, we're still in trouble because we still can't feed ourselves. So somewhere around the 1950s, and the bigger companies, they innovated and came up with a new responsibility, and that was Kaizen. Now, Kaizen is not a business tool in Japan. It's a normal cultural thing, you know. If you're a kid and your mom doesn't like your room, your mom will tell you to go Kaizen your room. It means go make an improvement. It doesn't mean just tidy it up. It means rethink it and go rethink your room and do it better. Not just fold the stuff that's there. Rethink it. So they started using this as a business responsibility, especially in the 1950s. It became pretty clear that they were way behind in every kind of technology. Also, they realized that they had just been destroyed in a disastrous war. They could also see that China was big and angry at them for their bad behavior during the war. Their nervousness got to be a little bit higher in the 1950s because they thought, man, we're also in trouble. They also were concerned about the racism they saw in the white populations for a number of years prior to that. So this was very concerning to them. And they innovated with the K. Okay. Testing. And that was to extend the ethical imperative to be an imperative to improve things. That's when all that chapter 3 stuff started to really rocket forward. And that's when their economy took off. Now, in the 1980s, they tried to go up again to the I, which means do the improvements, but even at an accelerated level. You can read about that in the book. You know what? They basically backed off from that. That was probably a mistake. It caused too much death and destruction, like suicide, senior managers. And one, the I was really only for senior managers. They were supposed to come up with like a gigantic level of improvement. The pressure was too high. The Japanese, if the Japanese think the pressure is too high, just step back, because the Japanese take a lot more pressure in their life than we do, a lot more. Their work life is much more stressful than ours. If they think something is too stressful, it's like it's gone, completely crazy. So suicide rate among senior executives went up to more than their normal level, which is still a lot higher than ours. But, it went up, and so they sort of have backed off. So you can say that this maybe is a question mark as to whether that will continue, or we definitely did see it, but it never became fully established because it was too crazy, too dangerous. So, but this is permanent. Now, what can a company be in this model? A company can be M, KM, or IKM in this model. Notice I said really not currently thinking that there are many, if any, IKMs. But you have to have M to be K. This is a paradox also of chapter 3. Innovation is only valuable when the innovation happens on top of stability. Innovation by itself is worthless because innovation creates potential value, but you must capture the value. Okay? You can't capture the value without the M, without the repetitious reuse of something. So one of the paradoxes, and at this point, is ask yourself, which company is more innovative, Apple or Microsoft? If I was in class, I'd spend time with you and go over this, and I'd win, which is, much to your surprise, and I can, it's pretty easy to prove with just thinking about it. Microsoft is maybe 10 times more innovative than Apple. So as we examine that particular paradox, what we see is that we need both of these. Innovation, maintenance, I should a special way here in this IKM operating doctrine. Improvement needs maintenance. They have to work together to work at really high levels. One problem we have in the Anglo-Axis is we tend to be contemptuous, and we don't really value following rules in the organization. We think of that as just a bunch of hourly workers. We think that the innovation, once again, not this innovation, we think that the improvement comes from managers, not from everybody. Well, guess what? There are not that many managers, so basically they can't have that many ideas. And then we tend to disrespect the hourly workers, restaurant workers and things like that. They're really essential. They work hard, and I'll tell you what, you try being a waiter sometime. It's a flippin' difficult job. Well, it's really difficult to be a good waiter. Okay, so those are really challenging jobs that we don't respect as much as we should. To really get the full leverage out of the Chapter 3 material, okay, remember the Chapter 3 material is the Western version of what they're trying to do in Japan, mostly successfully, not in every company. They do a lot of dumb stuff in Japan too. But the Chapter 3 material really only works really well when you're KM. Okay? If you're just an M organization or a weak M organization, we can even, I'll draw sort of a line here saying that the Japanese are a really strong M. Canada is really more of a weak M. But if you're down here as an M organization, either the Japanese or the Canadian style, there's certain things that you can't do and things that you can't ask your employees. Like for instance, the improvement ideas. You can't really ask your employees to do a lot of improvement if they're really M people. You have to change the culture first. Hate that. You start with yourself, of course, and the people close to you. They learn. The people around you learn. It has to start somewhere. Typically, it would start with managers, but it doesn't start with managers telling other people what to do. The only way this works is if it binds everybody, okay? This can't be a tool to force those guys down there, to behave in a different way. So here we have the KM. This is essential for the stuff that you're learning in Chapter 3 to function consistently. If you're just M, can you still get improvements? Yeah, but they tend to be herky-jerky, meaning that you get them sometimes, you don't get them other times, you come with ideas, you don't implement, stuff like that. But here now I'm going to come to the ultimate problem that has to be solved, is if you are a KM organization, or trying to be, think about this. If an employee gives you an idea and the boss says no, okay, the employee will go back. Let's say the employee gives you another idea and the boss says no. And the employee goes back and works happily. A week later, employee comes up with another idea and the boss says no. Is there going to be a fourth idea? Probably not. One of the tremendous impacts of this is managers in this environment almost totally, not entirely, but almost totally give up control of the floor. Because if you want to say, or if you want to be KM, you can't say no to employee innovations unless you can prove that they're actually dangerous in some ways. Okay? You no longer, as a manager, have the discretion to say yes or no. You have to automatically say yes to everything, or the Toyota way is most things don't even have to be approved by the manager. So if we look at Canada and we look at the, say, employee improvement suggestions, typically in a Canadian company, really nice, a good Canadian company might come up with 2 or 3 or less, between 1 and 3 employee suggestions per employee per year. And in some places, it's even less than that, like less than 1 implemented employee suggestion per year. Toyota, on the other hand, averages 27 implemented employee suggestions per employee per year. Think of the number of suggestions that is. You have a factory with 1,000 people. You're talking about 27,000 implemented improvement suggestions. Well, guess what? Management can't control that. You'd have to hire 500 managers just to look at the documents. So one of the implications of Chapter 3 material and this operating doctrine is that control of operations, whoops, I was going to point to something I had on the board before. Remember that old task versus procedure thing? Control of procedures is almost totally in the hands of the people doing the procedures, the workers. And managers no longer have control. It's not that they give control. It's not empowerment. That is a bogus word. Empowerment means I allow you or force you to do something. But if I change my mind, I can take it back. So empowerment is still Anglo-Axis top-down decision-making. This is not empowerment. This is a system that only works when managers are afraid or unable to exercise operating control. And one reason they're afraid is they know if they start doing that, performance will go down. So this organization actually performs better when management control is limited because managers, are not smart enough and don't have the experience, and there are not enough of them to actually control the procedures. There are too many procedures. So this has been not a transfer in the sense of on purpose. By gravity and accident, the system evolves to the point where managers are no longer in the decision loop for most improvements. The Toyota system, which is mainly the Japanese system, a lot of other companies in Japan do this. We just know more about Toyota, but Panasonic, NEC, Nissan, all the guys. The way they do it basically is if you come up with an idea inside your work group, everyone in your work group has to approve it. It has to be unanimous approval by your work group. When everyone in your work group approves it, it just happens. You don't need your approval as long as it's just inside the work group. If you have an idea of something that you would do differently that would also impact another work group, then you have to get their permission too, meaning you have to get your work group's approval, then you have to go to your manager and say, we did this, we need the other group. Now that manager talks to the other manager, and it goes down and they go to that work group, and that work group then has to agree. If both work groups agree, then it's just done. Notice the managers come into play when an idea transits between teams or work groups. But if it doesn't, then the manager is not even really involved in the decision. And so for most improvement ideas, manager is aware of what's going on, but the manager doesn't think, oh, I have to decide, I have to approve. That has evaporated in the most advanced organizations. This is radically different from that Anglo-Axis culture, that boss controlling. Top-down, manager-led, can't work here. This cannot be top-down manager-led. This means that system has already broken up. That's one reason we have such difficulty in Canada and the US, and more in England, of moving to really do those Chapter 3 things. Is part of the movement to Chapter 3 type of techniques is this culture has to change. And for us, it's a breakdown of our old culture, because our old culture was the boss controlling, top-down. Some people call it command and control. That's if you want to look that up, command and control, meaning the boss he does things. But that's a bit of a wrong thing, because they come up with the word command and control by saying that's what the Army does. But guess what? The Army doesn't do that. None of the armies in the advanced countries actually do that. Most of the armies in the advanced countries more or less work like this, meaning the work group, the team, the platoon decides. Okay? Now there's a lieutenant in charge, but really the lieutenant's in charge of strategy, not the tactics so much. At the platoon level, the lieutenant gives guidance about the strategy. It's the sergeant that implements, but the sergeant is one of the hourly workers. So what we have, especially nowadays, the same thing has happened in the military. They realize that they won't be as effective on the ground if everyone waits for the captain to tell them what to do. So the level of autonomy in infantry forces today in the US, Canada, England, probably, I don't know about France and Sweden stuff, but certainly U.S., Canada, and England, level of autonomy, local autonomy in infantry units is sky high compared to what most people believe, or and compared to what it was 100 years ago. So even that is moving in this direction. So that's operating doctrine. You're going to see it twice, and then you have to write a paper. When I say see it twice, you're going to listen to this. I'm emphasizing things in a way different from the book, but everything I said is consistent with the book. What happens, though, is when you're reading, the book only mentions like once or twice that it's an ethical responsibility. What I found is I need to repeat that idea more, because if you read it just once, somehow it doesn't quite land. So I'm really landing on this. When you read the book, after having listened to me, you'll see that what I'm saying is totally consistent with the book, with the exception that the book doesn't really discuss this too much. That was a mistake. We left it out of the book. What can I say? And also the part I added, which is, is this good or bad? Well, if you want to own an iPhone, not being M is bad. But if you want to be a free, open, human being and in touch with your, original human being self, this is actually better than this, because we have given up a lot of our, we've probably given up most of our autonomy in order to have iPhones and woven cloth. Okay? So that then is the operating doctrine. Very, very important for improvement. If you can't get to KM, you cannot reliably do most of the stuff in chapter 3. Period. What can you do if you don't get there? There's a lot of good stuff you can do. You can do good standard costing, activity-based costing. You can still do improvements. You just can't do improvements all the time. Improvements just come every once in a while. They have to break through the barriers. So the improvements are slow and kludgy, but do they exist? Yes, they do exist. Some M companies are better than others. Okay? So that is why we're doing this, is because you, through your career, are going to see, places in this area. So knowledge is becoming a little bit more clear. And the things that are in chapter 3 are now becoming universalized. And a lot of companies are now playing around in this area. They don't know clearly what they're doing, but it's pretty clear to them that if they want to do just in time and, all that stuff, there's a bunch of stuff, mushroom design, all that kind of, if they want to do that stuff, boy, it's hard to do that if everyone waits for the boss. So this M system is crumbling around us fairly slowly, and you're going to be part of it. And so it's going to be pretty cool, really. Especially it's going to be cooler if you sort of know what, if you know what's happening. Okay, but you are, you're really lucky. You're going to see the crumbling of a more oppressive Anglo-Axis system. May not be finished in your lifetime, but you will see the crumbling happen. And you're already seeing it in other parts of your life. Even Black Lives Matter, and it's not directly, the British weren't that exactly racist like the Americans in that sense, but the idea that people have power over each other, that definitely is related to the whole Black Lives Matter. Someone's on top, someone's on bottom. It's also the women's movement. Also gender, meaning gender identity stuff. Almost all of those social things that are out there are actually even part of this crumbling. Okay? So, this isn't isolated business stuff. This is also the crumbling of that top-down sort of authoritative control of people's lives. This is how it happens in business. Those other things are how it's happening in the rest of life. So you're going to see a lot of that. And is it going to be fun? Nah, it's not going to be fun, because no one really knows what it's going to look like at the end. We know the old stuff is bad. I don't think anyone has a clear vision of exactly what it's going to look like, on the other side. And I'm sure there'll be surprises, and there'll be reversals. We'll go back. We'll lose. It's not going to be an even progress in a direction. It's going to be tough. But you know what? It's definitely the right thing, right? It's getting rid of things that over control and oppress people. This is just the inside the business version of that. So. Anyway, the operating doctrine, huge concept for you going forward in your professional life of encouraging improvements in the organizations that you're part of. That's it for this clip.